Okay, what's up, everybody? Today's Monday, May 4th, 2026. It's Luther Wilson III, the real estate extraordinaire. As a lot of you know, we're here representing for Upside Property Services and the affiliate companies. Getting to it, baby. All right, so tap in. If you want to learn more about real estate, if you're interested in buying or selling or placing capital, of course, check out the YouTube channel. You can get on there, type in Luther Wilson III. I just recorded session number 97, which should be uploaded within the next week or so. And I get into how residential real estate investors can incorporate some of the good stuff that multifamily and commercial real estate investment operators utilize in our businesses to continue doing deals, growing portfolios, sourcing capital, and so forth. All right. So I have been jamming on capital strategy and operations for a few years now, taking a deeper dive into the reality of, real estate investing here in the Kansas City market. All right. And I was reviewing some of my numbers and some of my findings. I did a post yesterday. It was a reel, and I posted it on LinkedIn as well, talking about the numbers, right? From me and my partners and the clients I have helped over the last 6 to 7 years, okay? Average purchase price to get into a fixer-upper opportunity, the average renovation cost, okay? And then, of course, part of that is the average all-in cost, okay? And then for me, I like to track mostly the ones that we buy and hold because that's mostly what we do. And it was very eye-opening and refreshing to look at some of those figures again and think about the capital, okay? Even though we were buying right more often than not, even though I was handling the renovations and we were getting through those rather efficiently, even though all of them that I did with my clients and my business partners within that 6-7 year period, the average all-in amount for the purchase and renovation was around 78% of the after repair value, which is pretty sweet, right? Where it gets interesting, right? And what I think a lot of investors sleep on and they may not see it or they may not communicate it effectively is those gap funds. So even though we were all in on the purchase and renovation for under 80% of the after repair value or actual appraisal amount, I'm using the actual appraisal amounts because we refinanced almost all of the ones that we kept, right? And then we did seller financing, which adds a whole other element to the mix when you're talking about gap funds. So the gap funds, right? Overages on the renovations that the lender wouldn't cover, interest payments on the short-term debt, okay, which a lot of times for us is hard money loans, right? And then you got holding costs, okay, which could be utilities, mortgage payments after you refi. It could be permits, insurance, okay? And then what else is there? Oh, not to mention if there's any placement fees, okay? And then also commissions. So those gap funds is massive. So I looked at the numbers and I dug in deeper. I had one particular business partner. We did 7 buy and hold, right? Where we bought it, we renovated the property, we refinanced, and we did seller financing from there. And we had a nice run between the end of 2019 through the early part of 2023, right? Some of y'all know I stepped away from that particular enterprise last year in November. Long story, maybe I'll get into more of that at a later date. But my point is, with those 7 that we bought, renovated, refinanced, and did seller financing, okay, I did that with one particular business partner. On average, we received over $28,000 in down payments from our seller finance buyers, okay? And I say all that because even then we still had capital, outside capital, some of his money, some of my money on top of that, that we had to pour into the enterprise to pay those gap funds, the commissions, the holding costs, mortgage payments, interest payments to short-term debt, and then overages on the renovations. That's massive. Okay. Very key point here. Of those 7 that we bought and held, okay, using the BRRRR strategy with a twist, doing seller financing on the back end, again, we got $28,000 down on average. We still had money left in the portfolio. Why? Because of those, what I call sleeper costs, okay, or gap funds to run a real estate investing business, okay? It came out to about $25,000 per door, okay? That was when it was all said and done. When we had those properties, all 7 of them were performing and cash flowing $300 to $500 a month. When that was all said and done, okay, we still had about $180,000 tied up in that portfolio, which comes out to around $25,000 a pop, okay? And I bring this up because this has been fascinating to me over the last couple of years as things have shifted and evolved, right? If you're doing long-term rentals or rentals of some sort, the numbers are going to be different. That's why I talk about strategy and why it's so important. And then having capital that aligns with your investment strategy is so important. And then, of course, operating the thing like a business. Capital, strategy, operations. It's massive, right? And I bring this up because a lot of investors have gotten on board with seller financing the last few years, or last handful of years rather, but some of them, you know, are still doing rentals, which I get it. I want more rentals too, but we have to understand what that really looks like. And then another key point is how much are our gap funds costing us? Most of the money that we utilize, whether it's ours or somebody else's, has a cost to it. We got to pay it back. Some of it may be over a long-term basis. A lot of investors out there have to pay that money back in a short-term basis, on the short term, you see, rather quickly, within 6 to 12 months, maybe a couple years. You feel me? So if you aren't doing seller financing, right, and you're not getting $5 or $10 or $20 or $30,000 down, and you're keeping these things as rentals, right? Instead of having maybe $20,000 to $30,000 left in each deal, that's an average. If you do 5 to 10, some of them you're going to crush. A couple of them you may fumble a little bit, and then you're going to make up for it on some other ones, right? If you are doing rentals, instead of getting, you know, $5, $10, $20,000 down or upfront money, you may get first month's rent and deposit. So you're talking $2,400, maybe $3,000 to $4,000 for rentals in the Kansas City area, and that's it. So if you go that route and you're doing buy, renovate, refinance, rent, repeat, you're talking, instead of having $25,000 to maybe $30,000 tied up in each investment on single family home investments in and around Kansas City, B class, C class, you might end up with $50,000 to $60,000 left in these deals. I'm just saying, y'all, this is the reality of it. You can't front on me. You can't fake the funk. The numbers don't lie, baby. So my point here, right, is we got to think about, what does the whole portfolio really look like, right? How much capital is really left in these deals, and whose capital is it, and how much does that capital cost? Shit, change the game, baby. If you're talking about growing an enterprise and running a true real estate investing business, we got to get clear on this so we can present it to capital investors who may want to invest with us. The shit performs, the shit runs, and there's different strategies. There's pros and cons to all of it. And I'm just encouraging y'all, let's keep going, you know? Keep going. It's hard out here, but we got to keep going, baby. So tap in if you want to learn more. I didn't mean to get too far into the weeds, but I've been looking at my spreadsheets the last few days, wanting to market things in a little bit different light than what I'd been doing before. And I think it's going to open up a lot of people's eyes to what the real numbers are. The stuff will cash flow. The stuff performs. There's different plays out there, but the capital, how long is it going to be tied up in these investments, and how much is really tied up in these investments. And there's a number of ways you can look at it. The outside capital a lot of times doesn't get accounted for in what some of the investors are utilizing. Okay, I've done that too. Like the outside capital on the 7 that I did with that business partner, we had to pay it back, right? So even with that, we were still cash flowing, but it's not quite the same. So anyway, different plays out here. I hopefully encourage y'all. Hit me up if you want to learn more about real estate investing, the capital, the strategy, the operations, and stay tuned. I'm going to keep dropping some videos, right? So reach out. All right, stay blessed.